screen. And now I would like to invite Dr. Himanshu Mehta from Mumbai, from my city, of course. And I would like to hand over the virtual dais to Dr. Himanshu. Dr. Himanshu, you can please take over.
Thank you, Emai. Thank you so much. And thank you for being there and getting this thing started. Good afternoon, friends. And this is one more wonderful session that we have a very, very important part of life. Everybody gives their exams, ever so often we have exams. And in the life of a surgeon, every single day is an exam. It's like an IPL. Every new case has a challenge in itself. You can never just call it just a cataract or just a new retinal detachment. You can never say that. Yeah, every time it gets us new challenges, new problems, newer issues. You can't be underconfident. You can't be overconfident. And every time you get in, you appear for your exams, you do your case, but then the results wait for you on the next day. And every surgeon worth his salt is really missing a few beats in his life, not just during the important part of surgery, but especially when you see the first post-op day, because there are so many surprises and so many slips between the cup and the mouth. And what bothers you is not, everything going well, patient happy, well, that is okay, taken for granted. But what we are really looking at is when we have problems, when we have issues, and when we have people who really are complaining, and what is the cause, what have we done wrong, where have we gone wrong, and we all need to learn from each other by sharing our knowledge and experience. That's why we came up with this concept of the instruction course. Oh God, what have I done? Was I responsible? Was situation responsible? Was circumstances responsible? What exactly happened and why have I got into this mess that I have? Post-operative surprises, post-cataract surgery. We have decided to divide the talk into multiple speakers so that we have I'm not mentioning about eventful. We'll mention a little bit about eventful cataract surgery, but here things have gone well. It's an uneventful surgery, and despite that, you have problems. You are waiting for the results, and that is the most important part, that you wait and see what is happening on the second day, and you're not sure what is there in front of you. So the most feared nightmare of refractive surprise and toric troubles. Dr. Rohan Mehra would be speaking on that. The uncommon hurdles, glaucoma and its perils. We have a very expert ophthalmologist, a senior one from Mumbai, well trained and into practice, and who is going to tell us on the uncommon hurdles, glaucoma and its perils. Visual surprises would be by Dr. Pooja Mehta to tell us what is going on, what surprises do we have, what to expect, how to go about with it, and what can be done. Rohan, are you ready? Then we will be starting with you. In case if you are, do let me know. And of course, tissue tantrums. Just as surgeons have tantrums, anesthetists has their own tantrums. The patient's eye also throws tantrums. The poor surgeon, Hardik had to face tantrum with his wife in the morning, and his child while going to school, he just dropped the child to school who threw a big tantrum of wanting to have something, and there he is going there, and to top it all, first surgical opening, he sees the post-operative patient and he sees the tissue tantrums. Tissue tantrums would be from the cornea, from the iris, from the aqueous, from the vitreous, from the retina. All of them have a great chance of showing tantrums. And so this is something which we have to look at. And the most important thing that we look at is unhappy patient. You know how it is. Today we have oversold ourselves so much and raised the patient's expectation humongously. We have said कुछ नहीं होता है, no stage, no infection, अरे कुछ नहीं, no टाका नहीं देगा, इंजेक्शन नहीं देगा, आईवी नहीं देगा, हॉस्पिटल में नहीं रखेगा, कुछ नहीं, आप ऑफिस में जा सकते हैं कल. You know what we did? We did only one thing. We created trouble for our own self. We raised expectations to a huge level and we undermined our own surgery. You know how we realized that a cardiac surgeon doing bypass surgery, which is quite a simple surgery if you go to the nitty-gritty of surgery. I am by no means degrading a cardiac surgeon, but the sternum is opened by somebody, the lima-rima graft, the saphenous graft or the arterial graft is taken by someone, which is not very difficult. You have to just dissect a clean anatomy for a surgeon and mechanically post it from the aorta onto the left main or the right main coronary. They don't even use a microscope. Forget using 80, 90 or 10-0 sutures. They use a small pidlu loof, and you never know when the intima has come through, so that there'll be scarring and the blockage may happen within no time. But despite that, you know how they've made a big hue and cry about it. Cardiac surgery. So the patient walks like this for 6 months. He never complains. There are one tube going here, one tube going here, one tube here, one tube here. He's in the ICU with multiple beeps. So for 3 months, though, he never talks about the heart. So despite 4 blocks, even if 2 are blocked, after the surgery, nobody will come to know. Whereas cataract surgery, by evening, patient will say, I can't read my WhatsApp, doc. It's 8 hours. And, I don't think everything has gone well. That's how we have raised the bars, increased the stress on the surgeon. The anesthetist is generally very, very kind to the patient, but not the surgeon. The surgeon's heart rate is never monitored. There's no Holter monitor for the surgeon. So how to tackle an unhappy patient in the long run is what we have to look at. Rohan, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
So we start with Rohan. Comes up the first talk that we have. Go ahead, Rohan. Over to you. I'll stop sharing 1 second.
Is my screen visible? And am I audible?
Yes.
Great. So at the outset, thank you so much, Dr. Himanshu Mehta sir, for this opportunity. Hot Sunday afternoon. Nobody can go out. Great time for learning. Most part of India is hot and dusty at this moment. So the topic that has been given to me is the most feared nightmare, refractive surprise. And the reason I chose this photograph for my first slide, when the fictional character you thought was dead was alive this whole time. So what that means really is that 10,000 surgeries, 15,000 surgeries, 20,000 surgeries you would be doing, and you will never get a refractive surprise. So you'll think that probably it just doesn't exist, or it's not going to happen to me. But it's been alive this whole time, and it does happen. And when it does happen, you have to be prepared for it. So today's cataract surgery is like the game of the past. You get one chance to hit it right. Or do we? With the advancement in technology, it is now possible that even if we go wrong with the refractive surprise, if with our surgery and we cause a refractive surprise, we can still correct it. There are multiple methods to correct it. So first of all, we need to understand where this refractive surprise is coming from. So the sources of error can be error in planning, error in measurement, and error in execution. So we need to go to the drawing board and need to find out where this error has come from. Act like a detective, start from the very beginning, because if you can detect where the error has come from, it will go a long way into having a chance of managing that refractive error correctly. So what went wrong? The first and foremost thing, as Sir mentioned in his introduction as well, is patient selection. You need to see the psyche of the patient. You need to see the expectations of the patient. You need to find out what the patient is wanting from you, and then decide on the type of IOL that you're going to choose for that patient. Sometimes it's not even a refractive surprise of that magnitude, and still the patient is unhappy. And sometimes you could have a refractive surprise of, say, a -1 or a -1.5, and the patient still does not complain. So patient selection preoperatively is of umpteenth importance. So what is it that we do wrong these days? What we do wrong these days is we counsel our patients, you'll be 6, 6, and 6. Patient has been, juggling around with his glasses all through his life, especially at the age when he gets a cataract in his late 40s, early 50s, or, in his 60s. He's having a constant change in the number of spectacles. So we advise that we'll implant a multifocal lens in your eye and everything is going to be all right. So this is where we oversell ourselves. We tell the patient we are going to make you spectacle free. Now, over time, all doctors have realized this is not what you're supposed to say to a patient. You're supposed to say that we are going to decrease your dependency on spectacles, not make you spectacle free. If you say that you're going to make him spectacle free and then later on something goes wrong and the patient gets spectacles, that is the time that the patient is going to sit on your head. What is there in the patient's mind these days is you spend money and you can attain spectacle freedom. We know that's not the truth. Every individual's eye is different. Money cannot buy you spectacle freedom. Your eye has to be in sync. All your optical mediums have to be correct. Only then spectacle freedom can be obtained, and that too for 90% of the time of the day. Probably still, even if everything is absolutely right, you will still need glasses for maybe 10% of the time. So you need to analyze your patient mindset. Patient wants spectacle freedom versus a post-op vision goal, quality of vision, and is ready to pay a premium. Now it's up to you how you analyze this. First of all, you need to know why that patient wants spectacle freedom. What is the age of the patient is need to be taken into consideration. Occupation, the hobby, activities, whether distance, intermediate or near vision is required more often of the time. Utilitarian versus immaculate vision of ocular health. A level post-op outcome, provide practical everyday experience to the patient, explain the possibilities that if I implant an X lens, then this is going to happen. If I implant a Y lens, then this is going to happen. So you make sure you tell him about his day-to-day activities. And we know nowadays day-to-day activities have become pretty limited as they weren't earlier. Now they've got very limited to our mobile phone and our laptops. So we need to counsel our patients according to that. So what are the patient expectations? Patient says, I can see better far, but I can't still, read. I can't read the headlines. I can read, but I need glasses to drive or watch TV. Why do I need glasses? If I have a lens implant in my eye already, why is it that my neighbor who had a cataract surgery can go around without glasses since the operation? Why can't I? I want the same thing. And knowledge explosion. This has again happened in the last 10 years. Again, everybody has a smartphone. Everybody has access to Google. I saw this on TV. I read it somewhere. I read it on the internet. So every patient thinks that they know more than the doctor does. And then they expect out of you. Most important thing when you do preoperatively, that has been found, there are multiple studies that have been done, that if a patient is suffering from a dry eye preoperatively and we operate the patient for a cataract, the patient will be unhappy. A refractive surprise can also occur because of a dry eye and an unstable tear film. So doing a 2-minute OSDI form analysis of the patient will do no harm. We can do a T-BUT test also. We can do a Schirmer's just to make sure that there is no dry eye. If there is dry eye, then you treat it before you go ahead with surgery and then go ahead with your surgery. If you have the availability of this tool really helps in avoiding refractive surprises. It's the eye trace. So how this helps is that it tells you the aberrations of the eye separately from the cornea as well as from your lens. It tells you different aberrations, whether that is coming from the cornea or from the lens. So in this case, all the aberrations are coming from your inside the eye, that is from inside the lens. Your cornea is absolutely clean. So this sort of a patient is a perfect candidate for a premium IOL, because the moment you will remove that cataract and you will implant the lens, the aberrations of the eye will be gone because they don't exist in the cornea. Now, flip side of it, if a patient has pre-existing aberrations present on the cornea and we go ahead and implant a premium IOL, the patient will still be unhappy because those aberrations of the cornea have not been treated. They have stayed the same despite your all your efforts, your perfect surgery. Because you did not touch the cornea, those aberrations remained intact. So these sort of patients are not good candidates for premium IOLs, because the patient will pay you a premium and then expect that everything should be absolutely perfect. This leads to unhappy patients. Patients might have blurry vision, and of course, the dreaded halos and glare. Precision and accuracy is everything. It's important to be precise in your biometry. Biometry, as we know, is measuring various dimensions of the eye, its components and their interrelationships, using this data to determine the ideal intraocular lens path. Now, why is it important to get the biometry right? Now, the attention should be on this slide. This is, I think, the most important slide here. So this is a study that was published in the British Journal of Ophthalmology in 2010. it says that claims relating to biometric errors, wrong intraocular lens power were the second most frequent cause of claims and results in payments of damages in 62% of closed cases in the UK. Which means if your biometry is wrong and the patient takes you to court, you have very little chance that you'll come out scot-free. So get your biometry right, make sure that you have documented everything properly. Despite if your biometry documentation is there, despite that, if there is a refractive error, of course, the patient will be unhappy, but your chances in litigation become much higher of succeeding. So errors in measurement can come very simply if the chin is not placed correctly, if there is a head tilt. So here we see same patient, different head tilt, and we get 3 different readings. In these 3 different readings, there is a difference of 1 diopter in magnitude and 10 degrees in axis, which will make your post-op refraction go haywire. So we need to make sure that there is no head tilt when we're doing these readings. Trained person should be doing these scans. If you're not doing it yourself, a person who has experience over the years, so that this sort of a problem, can be taken care of. In most centers now, what we have started using is we have started taking readings from multiple devices. So we used to take readings from a manual keratometer earlier. Then we take readings from our biometers. Now biometers have come in different principles. You have the Lenstar, which is the Elcor, the IOL Master, which is now in fact the 700 has come with the SD OCT. So you have different measurements that take, and all these devices, believe you me, if you take your measurements on all these devices, the same patient, within 5 minutes, all of them will give you a different value. They will give you a different K reading. So how do you know that which one is the correct one? Are all machines the same? So to get this error out of the way, Barrett has come up with this freely available formula. Here, what happens is that you can enter your whatever topographer or biometer that you have used, you can enter these values here in this calculator, and you can get an integrated K. The integrated K will take into consideration all the values that you have entered. And if you use these values, it has been documented that you will hit the nail on the head. Okay, so if a patient has a normal unoperated cornea, an optical biometer will work. An optimal biometer will do just fine. The problem comes when a patient who has been operated for a refractive surgery before, they come in for a cataract surgery, the optical biometer will not be able to give you the correct value. So how do you manage that? You basically go to, again, an online free using ASCRS online calculator. You choose whether the patient has undergone a prior myopic, a prior hyperopic, or a prior RK procedure. Once you have chosen that, then you get all these. Can I take more time, please? If it's not a problem, I have a few slides left. Can I take some more time?
Yeah, 2 minutes, just wind up. Yes.
Sure.
We have enough time, don't worry.
Right. So you have this calculator, you can enter the values on this calculator. Again, it asks you for a lot of values. You might not have all these machines at your center. The more values you put into this, the more accurate your IOL calculation will become. But that said, whatever values you have, whatever values you enter, you will still get a pretty good accurate lens power. So, or if you have a pentacam, you can enter this mean zone, the EKT that is there, into these Atlas rings. Then you can take the ERF, the ISIS, the ERP values from, your pentacam itself. The optical biometer can be used to enter the values of the axial length, the ACD, the lens thickness, and the white to white. Once you get these values, the calculator will use an array of formulas, and it will be able to give you an average IOL power, minimum, maximum. Mostly you use the average power. But for example, in an RK, you know that there's going to be a hyperopic shift. So you would probably want to use the most myopic number that's available. Okay, so few commercially available lenses that have a positive asphericity, zero asphericity, and a negative asphericity. This is again very useful in avoiding getting a post-refractive error, a refractive surprise. So if you have a patient who has a prior hyperopic LASIK, you would go ahead and put a positive aspheric lens. If there's a centered previous myopic LASIK, then you would go ahead and implant a negative monospheric lens. Whereas if patient has weak zone use, a decentered ablation, you feel that the lens can shift or tilt, you would put a zero sphericity lens. So once this has happened, you need to don the hand and you need to become Dr. Fix-It. Checklist in cases of IOL surprises: correct lens has been inserted and it has not been interchanged. Make sure that the right data was put in the formula. Half a diopter is not uncommon, but if there is 3 to 4 diopters difference, then check the data along with the A constant of the lens. Check if the lens has been placed upside down. A capsular block can cause forward movement of the lens and a myopic shift. Always check the status of the contralateral eye before making your decision to do what management are you going to do to correct the refractive surprise. Solutions include glasses, contact lenses, piggyback IOLs, laser refractive surgery, or surface procedures, and IOL exchange. So this is a table wherein it tells you that according to the refractive error that is present and the time elapsed from the surgery, what is the preferred surgical technique that should be used to correct the refractive error that has happened. Also, in now considering astigmatism, there are lots of toric IOLs that are being implanted. Again, for example, if you see here, if I'm making my incision at 180 degrees, there's a simple technique. You can see in the middle where the circle comes, it's giving me with the ZCT 450, which is the lens model, a residual error of 0.25, and with the 400, a residual error of 0.59. Now, if I just simply change my incision side to a 220 degree, so I'll be sitting basically a little more superior temporally, you see that the complete calculation changes. The calculator tries and gives you is the ZCT 525 and a residual cylinder becomes just minus 0.01. So simply changing your position can actually help you in decreasing your post-op refractive errors. Again, if the rotation has occurred, then how do you fix it? Online, astigmatismfix.com. You just enter these values. Once these values are entered, it beautifully gives you on the right-hand corner in the bottom, you can see that rotating that IOL clockwise should minimize the astigmatism, and the ideal toric lens would correct 1.70 in this particular case at 148 degrees. So you don't have to break your head at how much the rotation needs to be done in case the refractive surprise has occurred. So this is a short video on how this astigmatism fix works. Enter the patient details.
Yeah. We'll have to pause this. I'll come back to you. We have time. Let's go with the second speaker. Thanks, but wonderful presentation. A lot of things to be learned, a lot of questions to be answered shortly. We call the next speaker, Dr. Reshma Jhaveri, to speak to us on glaucoma and its perils with cataract surgery. Dr. Reshma Jhaveri is practicing in Mumbai and an alumni of KEM Hospital, and quite a senior person, specialty interest in glaucoma surgery.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So at the onset, I'd really like to thank AIOS, Dr. Partha Vishwas, and Dr. Himanshu Mehta for letting me talk on the topic today. It's a very wonderful topic. It's all about how the cataract has gone off well. A cataract is never just a cataract, and I have learned that over a period of time. We do get unique surprises, which we'd never expect. And a couple of them that I'll be speaking on is related to glaucoma. So let me do this. Okay. So this is a regular cataract that I did not expect any complications happening. It went off pretty uneventful, and everything is going on fine. And probably it was just a little harder cataract, so it took a little while to get the cataract out. But everything was fine. IOL was put in properly, and the next day I see is, of course, there are defaults, but there was some amount of hyphema. So hyphema generally occurs one day after the cataract surgery. However, it may take 2 to 14 days also for it to come up. It is characterized as red blood cells in the anterior chamber, and occasionally the patient may present with just blood staining on the iris. So it's very, very important to check that if the patient has any kind of blood in the anterior chamber. Now, why does it occur? There are early and late onset hyphemas. Early onset could be because probably there was some bleeding from the ciliary body, or cut end of the Schlemm's canal, or from iris or iris root, or from the corneoscleral wound. So wounds which are located more posteriorly tend to bleed more. If there was some iris neovascularization which was not seen, post late onset post-cataract surgical hyphema could also be because of neovascular vessels that form in the inner aspect of the cataract incision site. So they are very friable and they'll end up bleeding, or maybe because the PCOL haptics, which are eroding the ciliary sulcus, or ACOL haptic that was there, which may have caused bleeding by chafing the iris surface. And rubeosis or iris neovascularization can also be a source of late post-op hyphema. So, how does a patient present with? They might say that there is some visible blood in front of the eye. There's photophobia, pain, blurry, cloudy, or blocked vision, or blood might not be visible if the hyphema is very small. Why does this need attention? Why hyphema can dissolve or resolve on its own, but there are times when it needs special attention because they can cause raised IOPs, peripheral anterior synechiae, posterior synechiae, corneal blood staining. Sometimes, if there are huge spikes because of hyphema, then it can even lead to optic nerve atrophy or ghost cell glaucoma. So hyphema has its gradings whereby microhyphema or circulating red blood cells can only be seen on slit lamp examination, and they have a very good prognosis, about 90% get better very soon. And then there are grades that go from 1 to 4, which is less than 33% to 33 to 50%, more than 50%, or it's called the 100% or the 8 ball figure hyphema. And according to its gradations, it has its prognosis. So, what are the factors that decide the prognosis? It's very important to recognize that prognosis of visual recovery is related to these following factors, and they include the amount of associated damage to the other ocular structure, whether there is any secondary hemorrhage that's happening, or whether there are complications of glaucoma, blood staining, or optic atrophy. So how do we treat such patients? Obviously, eye drops to reduce, steroids that will reduce or limit inflammation, and dilating drops that will help with pain, patching over the affected eye, bed rest, limited eye movement. That is very important. Head is elevated of at least 40 to 45 degrees while sleeping. We have to keep checking the eye pressures, and if it's high, use beta blockers or anti-agonists. Pain control for all patients with hypopema should not include aspirin containing products or NSAIDs, as that can increase the risk for further bleeding and stop any anticoagulants. So this was another case, which was a 61-year-old woman suffering from, so she came with history of recurrent blurred vision, floaters, redness, elevated IOP, and pain in the right eye. She was operated elsewhere with a scleral fixed IOL and could not understand why that redness and pain kept happening. So on gonioscopy, we saw massive pigmentation, which was detected in the anterior chamber angle of the right eye, along with anterior adhesion of the iris and angle closure in the superior temporal quadrant and inferior nasal quadrant. The other eye, the chamber was pretty normal. Okay, a UBM was done where high echoes were detected in the sulcus at 5 and 10 and 11-degree position, indicating that the iris root was pushed forward by malpositioned intraocular lens haptic. And so this is basically a UGH, which is uveitis glaucoma hyphema syndrome, or Ellington's syndrome. Many publications have been made for the UGH syndrome, and it does say that it is extremely important to diagnose this, because misdiagnosis of a UGH syndrome can cause excess testing and may eventually lead to loss of vision. So it's very important to pick up these, even if the patient is complaining of mild pain or little blurring, it's very important to check the patient if they are having a UGH syndrome. And it has also been published that these UGH syndromes can be mainly because of a malposition or a subluxation of the lens. So what is the treatment of such? Shaffing of the posterior iris by IOL haptic almost confirms the diagnosis of UGH syndrome, although it will still be necessary to exclude delayed endophthalmitis. IOL explantation and anterior vitrectomy combined with intraocular injection of antibiotic was performed in the eye, and after 1 month follow-up, the patient's vision was better and the pressure came under control. So, what is the synopsis of this? That UGH has been reported in patients with ACIOLs, and mechanical irritation caused by malposition of the IOL is the underlying mechanism. Eyes with UGH syndrome can be managed with topical IOP lowering steroids um, or other anti-inflammatory drugs. However, the symptoms might not be completely resolved if the mechanical stimulation still persists, and hence surgical intervention may be necessary. And my third and final case is about a malignant glaucoma. Okay, this is coined by von Graffe in 1869 to describe the aggressive form of post-op glaucoma that was resistant to treatment and resulted in blindness. So we all know that it is also called as ciliary block glaucoma, aqueous misdirection, or direct lens block glaucoma. The normal direction of aqueous flow is from the ciliary body, from the posterior to the anterior chamber and through the Schrems canal. But in case of ciliary block glaucoma, there is an aqueous misdirection into the vitreous that is causing increased posterior segment pressure, causing anterior movement of the lens iris diaphragm, hence shallowing the anterior chamber and causing iridocorneal contact with the cornea. So the AC is extremely shallow, and the shallowing of the central, it's very important to diagnose this and differentiate it from the pupillary block. So shallowing of the central anterior chambers associated with increased intraocular pressure and normal posterior segment anatomy. Absence of pupillary block needs to be confirmed by the presence of a patent iridectomy and posterior segment pathology. So we need to figure out if there is any suprachoroidal hemorrhage that is happening posteriorly. So if I see a patient who has a shallow anterior chamber, and if the pressures are high, it could be, if we need to figure out if there is a PI that was already done, it's patent or not, or there's no PI. If there's no PI, then it could be a pupillary block, but in case of a peripheral iridectomy, there's a high chance of it being malignant glaucoma. And our UBM always confirms this where there is the anterior rotation of ciliary process, which presses against the lens equator uh, and prevents the flow of the aqueous. And hence it is known as a ciliary block glaucoma. So how do we treat this? Diagnosis, we have to first of all diagnose that this is malignant glaucoma. And if so, we use cycloplegia, aqueous suppressants, osmotic agents, steroids. If it's a pseudophakic or an aphakic eye, Nd:YAG laser capsulotomy and disruption of the anterior hyaloid face, laser therapy could be used, or eventually a surgical vitrectomy is mandatory. So, what is a take home message? There is always a possibility of post op surprises, even after uneventful surgery. Do a thorough pre-op evaluation to look for any signs that may tell us for an impending storm. It's very important to ask the history of the patient and ask if the other eye, if it is operated, was it uneventful? And a lot of it can be known from what has happened in the other eye as well. And in case of complications, keep calm and try and give the best treatment to your patient. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Reshma. Dr. Balla, if you are there, why don't you come in front? It'll be a pleasure to have you there on the screen also. Dr. Reshma, that means as far as this glaucoma is concerned, you need to dilate, no question about it, right?
Correct.
Not the classical glaucoma where you don't dilate. So without questions, we must dilate this patient. There would be a pupillary block, or you want to reduce the iritis or whatever.
Yes.
What is your opinion on paracentesis? Should you be doing paracentesis to remove the blood to reduce the pressure?
So it depends on what grade of hyphema it is there. And if it is not resolving, then definitely paracentesis is
So
something.
resolving in the sense, how long will you wait for it to resolve
Yeah,
before you
so
touch
we
that?
also look out for additional signs. If the pressures are rising, if there is a lot of congestion, if there's a lot of pain, we wait for probably a week or 10 days. But if in between there is a very high pressure and it calls for a paracentesis, then definitely we go ahead and do it.
Okay. And how often have you seen a vitreous hemorrhage associated with a hyphema?
Vitreous hemorrhage usually not as much as just a plain hyphema. I would think it's more of a anterior blood in the anterior chamber that is seen more.
Okay. We will come back to a lot of questions for this because this is very interesting.
Yeah.
Call upon the next speaker, Dr. Pooja Mehta, for her presentation. Pooja, go ahead.
My screen is visible.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we share our experiences with you all and together learn how to become better surgeons and physicians with each passing day. I will be talking about the visual surprises that can occur post an extremely successful cataract surgery. On day one, post-operatively, we see that the IOL is in place and the patient's cornea is clear and he's reading 6/6, N6. But like the olden days era where the doctor was the king or the god, the patient would quietly believe that he or she is doing fantastic and that they do not require or have any other complaints. However, in today's day and age, the tables have turned. And in spite of the operating surgeon knowing that everything has gone off well, it is what the patient feels and experiences is what matters at the end of the day. So to prevent any visual surprise, we must do our bit by doing a thorough pre-operative examination, starting from vision, tension, documentation, and most importantly, counseling the patient properly, explaining them the procedure, the possible side effects, and the solution options if at all anything goes well. We must also assure them as a doctor that we are always on their side and we'll be looking for the betterment for them. And in case if anything happens post-operatively, we are always there for them. Nowadays, doing a specular examination is very important. It is vital to document the corneal health of the patient. This is to be done not only for the patient, but also to understand the parameters pre-operatively. In case the count is low, we can prepare ourselves and our OT staff to keep a high density viscoelastic during the procedure. Also, if there is a low count, we must explain to the patient about the possibility of post-operative recovery period or the presence of corneal edema. Drilling it in the patient's head again and again pre-operatively that do you have a problem and it might and might not happen post-operatively. But again, telling them that in case if there's any complication, anything happens post-operatively, we are here for you and we'll treat you accordingly. The most important thing to do for a mature, a hypermature, or a brown cataract is a B scan. This is a must to check for the lens, vitreous, and retina status. This will also help us decide the course of your surgery, the lens that we'll decide to place inside the IOL. Also, a documentation also helps explaining to the patient that this is the current status of your eye pre-operatively so that they do not come back and blame you post-operatively in case if there's a complication. An OCT is a must in today's day and age. Check for a posterior vitreous detachment on your retinal examination. It is important for you to counsel your patients for the problems associated with the PVD. If it has occurred already, or if that also mention to them that it might occur post-operatively. The possibility of a floater has to be mentioned to a patient. In case they do not see the floater pre-operatively due to a dense cataract, or if they've been seeing it pre-operatively, telling them that the floater is not going to go away. It is here to stay with them. And we just need to tell them that you have to train your brain and your mind to adapt to this floater, and it is going to be here with you. The power, the beauty and the power of neuroadaptation has to be explained to the patient. In case if you see an optic atrophy on examination, please check for the pressure, fundus photo, OCT imaging, and do not forget to examine the fellow eye. Counseling the patient that you have an optic atrophy and explaining the prognosis to the patient pre-operatively is a must. Try not to counsel the patient for a high-yield ion implantation because it might not give him the results that a fellow patient who has a high-end ion implantation will give it to him. Counsel the patient very well. Post-operatively, when the patient comes to you for the first time, always look supportive. Attentively listen to their complaints. Give an encouragement for any positive thing they say. Try not to being rude, even if they're very irritating and asking the stupid questions. Spend some time with the patient. In the most common complaint post-operatively, as we all know, is dry eyes. Chubhan, irritation, redness, watering, lid swelling are the most common complaints that the patients give post-operatively. For this, we must give a positive reinforcement, add lubricating drops in your treatment regime for at least 3 to 6 months. Try diagnosing and counseling the patient before the surgery itself that your eyes are already dry and the surgery might or might not enhance it. Encourage lid hygiene before as well as post surgery, make it a part of the daily regime to clean their eyes regularly. In case if it's a severe dry eye and the patient complains too much, hot fomentation can be taught to them. Dysphotopsia. This is another major problem that is happening. The visual phenomena following cataract surgery and IOL implantation. IOLs induce a stray light artifacts onto the retina. These new patterns of rays projected on the retina helps with positive dysphotopsia, but sadly it makes the negative dysphotopsia worse. Dilating the pupil, however, makes the symptoms better, but dilatation can include another set of problems like glare and nighttime difficulties. These patients are unhappy and they are going to complain to you at every visit, and it's not going to go away easily, and they become even more focused on it. Again, explain to them the power of neuroadaptation. Avoid saying anything wrong with that there's some problem in your eye and that a surgery has gone off perfectly, even though it has, because ultimately they are going to think that you are the problem and you've created the problem. Listen to the complaints patiently. Explain to them that this phenomena will only reduce over a period of time. Preoperatively, making sure that the optic size is an important factor. Smaller lens create a less optic edge problems. Avoid using a square-edged optic IOL design. Always aim for a well-centered in-the-bag IOL placement. Studies have shown that overlapping the rhexis rim over the edge of the lens eliminates the problem of symptoms of negative dysphotopsia. However, in case if these problems persist and the patient is unhappy, offer them spectacles that will block the light coming from the side of stimulating the problem. Surgical correction, if it becomes too intense and the patient is very irritating, do try doing reverse optic capture. Or the least favorable method is for IOL lens exchange for a round lens in the bag placement. Post-operatively, in case if you see a cystoid macular edema, explain to if you have operated the first eye and if there has been a CME, make sure that the patient is made aware of the possibility of reoccurrence of this phenomena in the other eye. If there is some CME preoperatively, do show the OCT to the patient and tell them that this problem exists even before I'm going to touch your eye. Take precautionary measures by giving them topical corticosteroid that will help reducing the chances of developing CME. In case it still happens, because it might happen, reassure the patients and make sure that they are well aware that it can happen and it is a solvable problem. Counseling to the patient preoperatively, being there for the patient postoperatively is the most important factor for any visual surprise that could occur. However, in case of a visual surprise, please do not panic, be cool, appear confident, tell the truth to the patient, and together find a solution with the patient, take their confidence, and you will aim and achieve great results post-operatively. Thank you. And the patient will be happy, hopefully.
Thank you so much, doctor. You've already given us 2 minutes extra time for some other speaker. Thank you so much.
Dr. Balla Saab, namaskar, sir. Pleasure to see you here.
Yeah, sir. Same here, sir. It's my pleasure to hear to such wonderful talks and you moderating the session. And Pooja, you presented very nicely, covering all the aspects why even after successful cataract surgery, the patient sometimes remain dissatisfied, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
So that's a fact of life that, this patients, whatever you tell them from the beginning, that your cornea was bad and there is corneal edema, there is only one person who's answerable, you, because the fault is on you. Despite them knowing that they have vitreous floaters, after the Tyndall effect becomes even more clearer after the cataract is removed. And quite often a PVD is precipitated following cataract surgery. And this is the most unfortunate part in the life of a surgeon.
Exactly.
And it's not your fault. You try and keep the chamber maintained, whether it's a myope, hypermetrop, do what you want. But it can come and hit you so badly and the patient will blame you. मुझे पहले नहीं दिखता था. They will keep cribbing to you कि मुझे नहीं दिखता था. Even though they had it, हाँ पहले छोटा था, अभी दिखता है. And for next 2 to 3 months, till with that big frowned face, they will come and see you. And they'll keep bothering you about everything. And it's extremely irritating when it's not your fault. You've done a clean, neat surgery. But despite them, they are going to be extremely unhappy because something keeps floating. Oh, it's going to remain with me for the rest of my life. What am I going to do? Why should I have this? I don't want it. Okay, then operate. No, I don't want any surgery. This is exactly what we all go through, and the pain and the perils with that. But one of the things during the whole talk that we realized from the past three speakers, one of the biggest things in life, everything passes with time. Time is the best healer. And all those negative dysphotopsia, positive dysphotopsia, quite a few of them complain, यहाँ से नहीं दिखता है, there is cutout. So, I mean, I have to give them that BS. Just as in a multifocal, I tell patients that if you don't see the rings, then I've put the wrong lens in your eye. I start with that you will see the rings. Look at the light on day one of surgery. If you see the rings, then you know that I've done the correct surgery. After that, they'll stop cribbing. Because in 6 weeks, everybody forget that they have had that. Even dysphotopsia, they say that I can't see from the periphery. You have to just buy time and tell them that yes, over a period of time, it will disappear, and buy time. Buy time, buy time, buy time. That's about it. But listen to them carefully. And I'm going to cover up a lot more on that in a short while. Dr. Bala, be there, but we call our very nice, learned friend from Navsari and Surat, that who is going to be talking to us on a very, very important topic. And that, my God, tissue tantrums. You know, we just spoke about Dr. Hardik. Welcome to the show and thanks for being there.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to congratulate our committee members for beautifully conducting this virtual conference for the first time. And it is running very smoothly. And thank you, Himanshu sir, for considering me for a part of this beautiful instruction course. So my topic is tissue tantrums. So sometimes it happens that I would like to give you the practical our life example with our wife. One day she is behaving very nicely, and very next day she throws tantrum at you, and you think, "Arey, what I have done?" Means yesterday she was behaving very nicely, and today she is very angry with me. What has happened?
So look at the smile on Dr. Bhalla's face. You know, all married men have to agree.
So many of us have faced that situation in our life. So similarly, during our surgery also, it has gone uneventful, and very next day we see some complications. So my topic is tissue tantrums. So I would cover a few topics like wound leak in cornea, corneal edema, Descemet detachment, iris prolapse, shallow antechamber, retained lens matter, TAS, and endophthalmitis. So first, wound leak. Most surgeons nowadays perform clear corneal incision under topical anesthesia. So wound-related complications are very rare. However, it can occur sometimes, and possible reasons are short tunnel. So early entry during making the tunnel, then lot of wound burn during surgery if there is prolonged surgical time, or phaco power is used more, so that will give distortion of the wound, and wound can leak later on. Use of blunt blades also can cause ragged wound margins and torn flaps from the sides, so that can cause wound leak. So if intraoperatively you find a wound leak, then you can take suture, one suture, and that will solve the problem. But if any doubt during surgery, wound integrity should be checked at the end of the surgery. One can tap on the globe to check the egression of the fluid with the iris spatula, or one can do Seidel test. If it is positive, then one can take suture, or you can give a pressure pad for 2 to 3 days. That will solve the problem. Corneal edema, perhaps the most common unwanted complication which delays visual recovery. It is usually common with hard cataracts or prolonged surgical time. But there are few less common causes also, like in certain normal population, there is preoperatively less endothelial count. So surgical trauma will also reduce the endothelial count more, and that can cause corneal edema. There can be undiagnosed Fuchs dystrophy preoperatively, which can lead to corneal decompensation, or there can be some toxic reaction to the intraoperative fluid or intraoperative drugs which we use, like antibiotic or preservative-free xylocaine, can cause some toxicity. So normally for mild corneal edema, there is nothing much to do. it will usually resolve by itself with routine post-operative therapy. But if there is severe edema, steroid can be put more frequently, maybe 2 hourly for first 2-3 days. So that will help in reducing the corneal edema. One can use 5% sodium chloride hypertonic agent and atropine like cycloplegics. So usually within few days or it will resolve by itself. But sometimes if there is endothelial more of endothelial loss or there is pre-existing Fuchs dystrophy, then the edema may persist and it can go into corneal decompensation. So in those cases, only solution is to do corneal endothelial transplant like DSEK or DMEK. Desmet detachment is also quite common, and incidence is usually more with SICS than phaco. Most of the time it happens at the incision sites, either side port or the main incision, and mainly it is due to improper instrument insertion or inadvertent viscoelastic injection. If while injecting viscoelastic, if needle is not inserted properly into the wound, then the viscoelastic will go between the stroma and the endothelium and it will detach the endothelium. Rarely Desmet or Axis. Why I have mentioned this? Because in my initial days, I had one patient in which I did literally Desmet or Axis instead of capsular Axis. So I would like to just talk about it. It was a very old patient with hard cataract, and I was doing SICS. So after opening the incision with the entry knife, I started injecting viscoelastic, and I didn't realize that I have already detached the Desmet, and Desmet was lying, it was completely detached and was lying over the anterior lens capsule. So instead of doing capsular Axis, I did Desmet or Axis, and unfortunately that patient went into corneal decompensation and keratoplasty was done. So most of the time this complication can be well managed intraoperatively because it is visible, and at the end of the surgery you can inject air and Desmet can be re-attached. But sometimes if it is missed, then it is seen as a glass like shining flap mostly at the incision site. So then at that time you have to inject air, or occasionally if it is a large one, then one can have to inject gas also. And rarely if there is lot of endothelial cells and it goes into decompensation, then endothelial transplant like DSEK or DMEK has to be done. Shallow anterior chamber is also sometimes common. Either it can be with low IOP or with high IOP. High IOP part is already covered by Dr. Reshma. So low IOP, the causes are wound leak, choroidal effusion, or severe uveitis. So if it is due to wound leak, we have to suture. We can give cycloplegic, and if for glaucoma part is already covered, so I am not talking about it. Iris prolapse also can be can occur, but it is very rare with the phacoemulsification technique. The causes are wound leak, accidental trauma by patient's hand overnight can cause iris prolapse. If the tunnel is very short or wound is not properly closed, raised IOP can also lead to iris prolapse. So it is, if it is seen within 48 hours, we have to reposit the iris. But if it is more than 48 hours, then most likely you have to abscise the iris so that there is no chance of infection. Retained lens matter. It is very annoying to see next day on the slit lamp that there is a chunk of cortex or even lens fragment which is lying in the AC or in the pupillary area. So most common reason is that inadequate aspiration of cortex, especially subincisional, because many a times we are using coaxial irrigation aspiration, and the incision area is usually cloudy, edematous. So sometimes we may miss a small chunk of cortex under the capsule, especially if the pupil is small. So very next day it swollen up and then it just comes into the anterior chamber, and it is very annoying. If it is lying in the pupillary area, it will reduce the vision also. Very rarely a lens fragment can remain inside the anterior chamber. What happens that during the phaco surgery, a small piece, because of the fluid turbulence, it goes into the sulcus behind the iris and it gets trapped over there. So at the end of the surgery, you won't be able to see whether there is any residual lens matter. So very next day, it will come out, dislodge into the anterior chamber, and in that case, the only solution is you have to again take into the operation theater and remove surgically. Mild anterior uveitis is also very common even after uneventful phaco, because there is some inflammation, a minor few defolds or few cellular reaction is quite common after the even absolutely uneventful cataract surgery. But usually it resolves with the routine post-operative treatment. But sometimes there is severe inflammation. In that case, you have to give more frequent steroid cycloplegic, and you have to rule out certain systemic factors also which can cause more inflammation. One of the most severe inflammation scenario is a toxic anterior segment syndrome. Previously it was called as sterile endophthalmitis, but as it involved only the anterior chamber, it doesn't extend towards the vitreous cavity. So later on, it was renamed as the toxic anterior segment syndrome, or TAS. Symptoms are usually mild. Patient will have blurred vision, mild discomfort, minimal or no pain. But signs are severe. There will be total corneal edema from limbus to limbus. Of course, there will be minimal congestion. Sometimes there can be hyphema, or in severe TAS, fibrin may be, anterior chamber may be full of fibrin, or sometimes pupillary membrane may also form. Initially, IOP would be lower, but later on it can rise because of the inflammation, inflammatory matter clogging the trabecular meshwork. So possible causes are preservatives in drugs or irrigating solution. There can be improper concentration of drugs used intraoperatively. There can be traces of chemicals used in sterilization process remaining on the instruments. Contamination of instruments with bacterial endotoxin during sterilization also. Sir, just 1 minute. Treatment, mild cases, topical steroids with more frequency will suffice, but in severe cases, oral steroid or even subconjunctival steroid can be considered, along with strong cycloplegic and IOP lowering agents. And the last one is infectious endophthalmitis, with nowadays it is very rare in our high-tech setup, but it is the most dreaded complication. Incidence is very low, and the best way for the anterior segment surgeon is refer the patient to the VR surgeon. The mainstay of treatment is the intravitreal injections of antibiotic. Common pathogens are gram-positive cocci like strepto and epidermidis, and staphylococcus aureus, which is more virulent. But sometimes gram-negative infection can also occur. Vitreous step for culture and sensitivity to be done, and intravitreal injections. Vancomycin is the treatment of choice for gram-positive bacteria in dose of 1 to 2 milligram per 0.1 ml, and for gram-negative, we can use ceftazidime 2.25 milligram, or even aminoglycosides like amikacin or gentamicin. But there is a low risk of retinal toxicity with the aminoglycosides. And in severe cases, one has to do pars plana vitrectomy to save the eye. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hardik. In fact, to add on to your cortex thing, I have seen in a dirty brown cataract once in a way, a small piece of nucleus floats up from somewhere underneath the iris. It has been hiding. And to my unfortunate experience, I have seen a small piece of nucleus suddenly appearing into the anterior chamber after 2 or 3 days. So yes, you have to be careful that you have a thorough cleanup, and especially if the pupil is going down in all those people with prostate medications, you have to be careful because the toric markings are not possibly easily seen. So the toric lens would be difficult when the pupil is going down. All those tantrums, intraoperative tantrums and postoperative tantrums, can always create trouble. We have time, Rohan. Before I finish, you had something to say for a couple of minutes. Go ahead, finish your presentation.
Yeah, I'll just take it from here.
Dr. Balla, we are impatiently waiting for a few questions from you later, sir. मेरा presentation हो जाता है. We'll have a good feedback from you too. Yes, sorry to have cut you off, but let's finish off what you wanted to say. Because it's very important. Toric lenses now, and they suddenly give us wrong axis. And what if you, even if you put it in the correct, how do you know whether the lens originally was planned? Go ahead.
Yeah, so till now we've spoken about if there is a refractive error or a residual refractive error in the spherical part. What if astigmatism is left behind? You have put in a toric lens and it has rotated. So how do you align it back to where you would be able to achieve the maximum refractive stability for the patient? So once a patient comes to you with a rotated IOL, whether it has been operated elsewhere or it has been operated by you, the first thing is you do not go in immediately to realign the IOL. You need to wait for at least 7 days. The reason being, you need to give the lens time. It is possible that there is retained visco behind, or there is a capsular distension syndrome, or there is a capsular contraction syndrome, and the IOL actually might rotate again back into the position wherein the patient becomes happy. So in the other IC, in fact, we were just discussing, it happens that on occasion you want to rotate the IOL, but the patient is happy. You see that the IOL has gone off by 20 degrees, but the patient says, well, I'm seeing fine. There's no... you think that it has got rotated. It all depends upon the patient. If the patient is unhappy, then you go ahead and you realign the toric IOL. So there's a simple way of seeing how much the IOL is supposed to be rotated in order to realign it. Online free calculator called astigmatismfix.com. You go, you enter all the data that is present with you. The current refraction, again, is very important. What is the current refraction of the patient also has to be entered. And you have to also enter that how much time has passed after surgery. So this calculator has an algorithm which takes all these things into account. And it beautifully tells you, like it's here in the right bottom right corner, that rotating the toric, in this particular case, the values that you have entered, that rotating the toric IOL 162 degrees clockwise would minimize this astigmatism. The ideal toric lens would correct an X amount of astigmatism at 148 degrees. So you don't have to break your head that how much do I have to rotate? Should I rotate it to the left? Should I rotate it to the right? 20 degrees is off. Which way, clockwise, anti-clockwise? This calculator will be able to tell you. So a simple video that I made to show you how this calculator can be used. You enter the details of the patient, you enter the eye, the lens model that you have implanted, that is supposed to be entered. Once the name has been entered, the eye has been chosen, then you go ahead and choose what type of lens was implanted into the eye. Then at the bottom here, you have all sorts of lenses. They have incorporated all lenses that are there available in the market into this calculator. Then you put what is the cylindrical power at the corneal plane, which you got from your K readings. Then you put the cylinder power at the corneal plane, which is now post-operatively because of your incisions that has changed. Once what you've entered, what is the current IOL axis and what is the spherical, current IOL spherical equivalent. Then what was the originally calculated axis? So how much off you've gone by. Then the current refraction, as I said, you're supposed to be giving what exactly is the current refraction in sphere as well as in cylinder. Then how much time has it been since the surgery has passed? What is the uncorrected Snell's visual acuity and what is the best corrected? And you just click calculate. The moment you click calculate, it has its own algorithm and it will tell you how much you need to rotate it by to get least amount of astigmatism to remain in the eye post the rotation has happened. It beautifully tells you about a graph, also the baseline alignment as well as the astigmatism. So I just, to sum it up, would say that keep calm and don't get disappointed. Refractive surprises may happen, but the good thing is that most often than not, you'll be able to treat those refractive surprises. And most often than not, patients are happy. If it's the first eye, you can always do a monovision in the other eye. That actually could, do wonders for both distance and near vision. And sometimes the questions are complicated and the answers are simple. So thank you.
Thanks, Ron. I can tell you for sure there was a lovely case I got. Somebody had implanted a Zeiss toric multifocal. And in front of me on the slit lamp, it showed different. Another slit lamp, it showed different. Then I made the patient lie down under the microscope. It moved. And then I realized that the rhexis was too big. Very, very interesting phenomena which I saw in this case was that the rhexis was so big that the lens kept moving and torsioning around. So there, yes, you have to be very careful. At the same time, when to go and when not to go is a very important thing, because if you are late, then fibrosis will happen. So you rather be in time than not be in time. So you have to wait for a particular time to get on doing your case, when to manipulate, because the cylinder also will change after some time. Your corneal toricity on day 1, day 2 and day 7 is never the same. So you'll have to take a thin line of demarcation. When will you move the lens? When will you not move the lens? So let's come to the most important, unhappy patient, which we all are talking about. Happy patient, nobody's bothered, we take it for granted, but it is those few who are going to be creating trouble for you. So the very interesting point that you have here that I see in my life is no pessimist ever discovered the secret of the stars or sailed to an uncharted land or opened a new doorway for the human spirit. So always be pessimistic. All those conservative people and non-risk takers and risk-averse people are the people who should not be trying any multifocal. They are the ones who should not be trying anything great, because they will not be able to move further in life. You have to be ready. You have to be going ahead with time. You have to move with technology, and you will have a price to pay. But Einstein had said way back in 1945 that humans will always be overtaken with technology in the long run. So if we don't move ahead with progress and technology doesn't mean just software, but including the hardware, the microscope, your optics, your 3D imaging, your 5G, whatever that you have. And this is what is important. So dealing with unhappy premium IOL patients, there is no such thing as a problem without a gift for us in its hands. We see gifts. Anybody who argues, tell them that please use 40-year-old technology, go ahead with the monofocal lens. Why should I break my head? Why do I want to give him multifocality? Let him go and use the regular thing which was going on in life. But the most important part of that is counseling. Pre-operative, operative and post-operative. The communication gap is the one which is responsible for majority of your problems. So honesty, clarity of answers, no ambiguity, look into their eyes and answer. Very important question that you have to look at yourself. Be very clear. You are very clear what you are saying. Be very clear of your answers. Unless you are very sure that you will do it on your mother's eye or your sister's eye or your father's eye, there's no point doing it. And look into their eyes and answer. People find it very difficult when you are looking. Patients may not understand body language, but they know one thing, whether the doctor is saying the truth or not saying the truth. If you flutter a little bit, they are not going to be trusting you. So premium cataract surgery is a game of expectation. Any cataract surgery is a game. When we started, I just said that the whole game is the game of expectation that we have had. We have increased the bar of expectation in the patients, and we are wanting the patients to see that they get everything under the sun. Whatever was the deficiency they had, they be myopic, hypermetropic, high astigmatism, bad tissue, shallow AC, bad iris, bad retina. But one thing, after cataract surgery, they all expect that they will be 20/20 and N5 without glasses. So it's the whole game of expectation which we have put on ourselves, and the burden is on us. So what patient demands, what they expect, what surgeons can deliver. Patients expect the sky. They don't expect anything less than the sky. Even if a patient is a free patient or paying you for only monofocal, they want to tell you that they want everything under the sun. साहब मुझे सिर्फ थोड़ा देखना है, सब दिखना चाहिए, पेपर पढ़ सकता है, उतना चाहिए. या श्योर, इट्स फनी, पेपर पढ़ सकता है, दूर का देख सकता है, तो दैट मीन्स क्या हो गया? यू आर टॉकिंग ऑफ वॉट एवर हाई टॉक दैट वी आर डूइंग इन द होल ऑल इंडिया कॉन्फ्रेंस. They want everything, but the common man only wants that. So counseling, the patient has come to take your interview on the basis of what he has heard, what he knows our body language will make it or break it. The potential of body, mind, and soul, your technique and what you can deliver is something which you have to be very confident about, and what and how you can deliver that is up to you. Skills. So counseling, under promise, over deliver. Always now with LASIK surgery and every cataract surgery becoming a refractive surgery, under promise and over deliver. Tell them that you're not God, they will understand. Most of them, in fact, some of the best of my patients, despite not having to have glasses, are wearing glasses because they want to camouflage their face. They want to look the same that they were, because the world will not recognize them. So quite a few of them still continue wearing 0 number glasses despite them being glasses free. So make them understand, they will understand that you are not God, and they will automatically be able to digest what you are saying. And never make them underestimate your procedure. Smile, infuse enthusiasm. It's very important that you infuse enthusiasm. Encourage more questions with patients' relatives. Very important. You have to understand one thing, that you have a group of people coming to meet you. You will realize there is one person who's the decision maker. Try and identify the decision maker, and that is the person who is going to be the most important person. Everybody looks into his eyes. The patient and the relatives will be looking into his or her eyes to find out what next step to be taken and what is the decision to be taken. Don't get irritated. There is never a stupid question. You encourage questions, they will stop after the second question. If you don't encourage questions, they'll ask you 10 questions. So plan, counseling, chair time, screening process, patient needs, expectations, ocular examination, dilate. There is no shortcut to your homework. Your ocular examination, dilated fundus examination, outcomes are achievable. People are here to help you. So you have to have your constraints, your progress, your feedback, your issues, but all of them put on one side. It is the execution which is important. Will it be, they'll ask you stupid questions, but they are not stupid. Will there be pain later? I cannot keep my eyes open. What if I sneeze? What is the recovery period? Please answer them with all your patience. And once you do that, you will realize a lot of happiness comes to them very easily, despite you not being very good in your surgical skills. Can I lose my eyes? Of course they can ask you this. And will I get a squint after laser? Will be a scar seen? How are you wearing glasses, doctor? If you are telling me that I don't have to wear glasses, why are you wearing? So you have to be like this, laser precision, very clear in your answers, no ambiguity, plan your talk properly, be to the point, and execute your answers well. Comes the most important part afterwards is the post-op counseling. Do not neglect that. Listen to them carefully. Most of the answers are in that. Like when you are talking about vitreous floaters, you talked about PVD, you talked about have you seen patients complaining that they've suddenly started seeing baggy eyelids? Then they'll start seeing all those things which they've never noticed before surgery, after the surgery. And they will be after your blood because you give them good vision. So listen to them, it's fine. So humane attitude, the biggest victory in medicine is to show a humane attitude, that you care for them. I've had talks with our senior colleagues, including Ramamurthy, and he has said that some of his patients who got endophthalmitis and lost their eyes were the most happy patients, because you spent time with them, you spoke to them, you counseled them. So they were thankful that the doctor is doing his job. It is their bad luck that they got it. So sympathy, don't hide facts. Tell them what exactly. Sujan hai to hai. So tell them sujan on the cornea, sujan on the iris, or sujan on the retina. Don't make them wait. There is always a few seats available in your office for the cribbers. They'll sit there and talk to the neighbors, the new patient. अरे मेरा कल सर्जरी हो गया, 15 दिन हो गया, अभी तक अच्छा नहीं हुआ, डॉक्टर कैसा है, ऐसा है, वैसा है. You will lose your patient there only. So see them immediately, attend to them and give them proper time. And if you've done that, some of the worst patients can become your best friends. And quite often, patients are not cribbing, they are just scared. They are just plain too scared. They're scared tremendously of what's going on around them, and they hear a lot of negative stories. Congratulate for all the positive. Now, how often have you seen कि मुझे बिल्कुल नहीं दिखता है? Then you are shocked. You know everything has gone well. Gradually, as you find out, you close one eye. Now do this in front of relatives. Make them sit in one corner. Tell them, can you recognize your relative? Can you recognize my person? Can you tell? Oh yes, they will recognize. So first prove them wrong. When they say कुछ नहीं दिखता है, बिल्कुल सब दिखता है. फिर नज़दीक का, हाँ छोटा अक्षर नहीं गया. तो what they wanted to tell you was छोटा अक्षर बिल्कुल नहीं दिखता है. But they, on act of omission, they forgot to tell you that छोटा नहीं दिखता है. And as a result of which, the whole family is in chaos. Okay, my relative is not seeing, and 6 of them will be crowding on you. So don't be rude, be firm, be strong at that time. You can't be overtaken by that, and don't put them down, but diffuse the tension in the room by showing that they can see. They themselves will feel embarrassed. नहीं ऐसा तो सब दिखता है, लेकिन सिर्फ वो newspaper नहीं दिखता है. So then because the family doesn't know what is going on. Anyway, nobody has bothered. Nobody has any time. Everybody else is there just because this one was scribbling. So examine thoroughly, make sure everything is 1000% correct. I mean, of course, this goes unsaid that you have to be very confident that everything was fine with the patient. Only then can you kind of chada on them and allow more family members to be around. Check vision, finger counting, Snellen chart for near vision, objects in the room, common sense stuff which you'll be able to recognize. Recognizing the family member, checking the name, time, ask them what's their WhatsApp. Add humor, buy time. As I said in the past with all the complaints, hyphema, rotation of the lens, toric lens, corneal edema, iritis, vitreous hemorrhage, vitreous floaters, PVD, all that you have to buy time, buy time. If there is no endophthalmitis, that's the only place where you can't buy time. It's exactly the opposite. Act fast. If you have ciliary congestion, lid edema, pain, don't wait. It's better to overtreat and take an opinion from a colleague. Send them for a second opinion. Once you have a psychological upper hand, give them a smart repartee. Talk to their spouses and other family members. This is from practical experience what I'm saying. Call them frequently for reassessment and reduce their fear and to show how much you care for them. Yes. Don't prove that you are the boss. Sometimes good enough simply isn't enough. Today patients want more from cataract surgery than simple restoration of vision. They want the whole world, and all their depression and frustrations have to be directed to you. Remember that. So if you don't hold on to your ground, they can chada on you very easily. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So Benjamin, and beware hypercritical, unrealistic expectation, excessive complaint, and the current prescription complaints far outweigh their actual visual prognosis. Those who are happy wearing glasses, forget it, don't have to worry about them. Don't have to talk about multifocal, don't give guarantees. No guarantees. Those who are on medications, antipsychotic, anti-anxiety, be very careful about them. A lot of OCD patients come to you and you have to be very careful of them. Preoperative talk, very important. Out of money expenses may result in high patient expectation, and bilateral surgeries should be done quickly. Make them see with both eyes. Don't let them compare one eye over the other. Counsel personally, look and feel excited unless you are sure and you tell them that this is what I would do in my eye. They will not like it. Maintain dignity of the technology. And worst scenario, tell them this surgery is not for you. You rather do 50-year-old surgery, which is fine. That's the gold standard. Go ahead and do that. So don't demean yourself. So don't go get into old tantrums. Have respect for your own self and your profession. Document in the clinical chart, counsel the patient about visual disturbance and reading distances. So each one has a separate reading distance, intermediate distance, full adaptation. Don't promise you will never wear glasses. So great power comes responsibility. Patient outcome is supreme. Our egos do not matter. We'll need to face the flak ever so often. You have a gift, use it judiciously. So friends, as you see, we have always seen that, and there are few cases in which we haven't done a great job, but the patients are happy. And there are a few times when we have done a great job and the patients are not very happy. So that's an interesting session. Hardik, what would you do if you have a retinal detachment which you see, post-surgery? How do you break the news to the patient?
I would like to tell the patient that probably the cataract was so mature enough so that I could not see the retina. So that would be probably the best answer. Otherwise, we cannot tell the patient that it was present before the surgery.
In case of a nucleus drop, what do you tell a patient?
See, in our setup, normally patient doesn't know that there was a nucleus drop because we have a we do have setup of vitrectomy also. So if there is any nucleus drop, then immediately on the same sitting we remove the nucleus and put the lens.
So you don't tell the patient that there was a problem, or you tell them that you had a complicated problem and you had done 2 surgeries on them?
Normally, if it has gone very well, then we did not disclose that there was nucleus drop.
Good, good. You are a lucky setup where father is also a vitreoretina surgeon and is a very proficient person. So that is something very, very important. Great. So that is a nice. Dr. Reshma, with respect to glaucoma, any more insight that you have had in the last few minutes that you'd like to share?
I think the biggest insight is not to take any cataract for granted. Anything can happen at any time. With a patient just walking in with absolutely normal, and we can land up with glaucoma as well. So we have to, as you rightly said, counsel the patient regarding. I don't think we need to explain everything in detail, but it's important to just let them know that even the most minimal of cataract can lead to problems. So be very vigilant the next day, follow up the patient extremely carefully, and don't take granted any symptoms that patients are complaining. It could be mild blurring, it could be pain in the eye. Everything should be taken absolutely. You have to talk to the patient, see the patient at very regular intervals, and see to it that they are treated properly. I think counseling is most important. I have recently had a patient who's had he was a 80-year-old person who I operated for grade 5, grade 6 cataract, and I had explained to the relatives that it is a very tough case, and he was denied from other places as well. But I think counseling helped a lot, and he had a second iris prolapse that was sutured, and then again a third procedure where we put a secondary IOL. But everywhere it was a lot of counseling to the relatives that he now is getting his mother for her cataract surgery. So I think what you said is extremely important. Just make the patient and the relative be aware of whatever is happening.
Do you do a trabeculectomy and cataract surgery simultaneously? And if you do, are do 2 separate incisions, or you go to the trab only for your phaco?
No, I do it at the on the same day and with 2 separate incisions.
Okay, so do you finish off the phaco first and then do the trab? You prepare the wound?
Yeah, I prepare the wound for the trab, finish the phaco, and then come back to do the trab.
Okay, and are there more chances of the trab closing in a case like this when you've done double surgery?
I think because that the site where the trab is done is pretty untouched. I think it works pretty well when it's done at 2 different sites.
Correct. So all in all, that is a good answer, that you can do the trab together simultaneously in the same sitting with good results. Rohan, with respect to toric lenses insertion, anything else that you would like to mention about, you mentioned some very important points: mixed astigmatism, Hill formula, and refractive surprises. Anything else that occurs to you in the past few minutes?
Rohan, you're on mute.
So yes, in fact, I had spoken about retained viscoelastic. So what a lot of surgeons have started doing, and we've also tried it out, you do a hydroimplantation for toric. So in that way, you don't end up putting visco at the time when you are actually implanting the IOL. So you negate the chance of the OVD staying behind the lens. If you do so, how this works is that your normal lenses, normal monofocal lenses, you first try it out in that. Once you're confident enough of doing a hydroimplantation in a normal lens, then you can actually start doing a hydroimplantation for a toric lens as well. And once you do a hydroimplantation for a toric lens, you don't put an OVD, you take the OVD straight out. Basically, you cannot have retained OVD post surgery on POD1. So that will not cause any myopic shift. It will not cause any refractive surprise. So yeah, we can incorporate that. And also on the point of that you asked Dr. Hardik about how you break the news. We had a great session about a couple of months back in our Youthful IRSI, wherein we spoke about these communication skills. In words of Dr. Grover sir, he said, use the sandwich technique. Use the sandwich technique, which means you say, all is well, something has gone wrong, but it can be fixed. So you've given two happy things on the side, and you've also told the patient in the middle that yes, this has gone wrong. So I think that really works when the patient gets to know that yes, it can be fixed.
So yeah, Himai, we know that. Till let the other guy show up on the screen, then I will disappear. So we will. Did you have your cup of tea or not, Himai?
Sir, you guys did not let me do that because the topics were very interesting.
Right.
I got engaged in this.
So, Ron, you said something very vital, very, very vital. How to break bad news. Always there is a silver lining. So even if you have a bad eye, आँख बच गई है, उसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है. There has been a problem because it was a problem, which is a fact of life. You are not lying anywhere. You have tried your best. There has been a problem, like in posterior subcapsular cataract, congenital cataract, posterior polar. I tell them that surgery will have to be done possibly in 2 stages. I will try and do it in 1. Hi, Ramu.
Hi. You just continue to be there.
As you say, sir, I have to just follow instructions from the boss. So
a great session.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Good. Yeah. Whenever we are ready, let me know. You participate in this too, Ramu. It'll be nice. So we've been talking about meeting patient expectations from various forms, how to break bad news. And this is what I learned from Ramu. He said, one meeting few years back very nicely, and as I quoted him also a little while back, that even if it's a dirty end of patient, but you spend time with the patient, and he was happy that you spent time and you were humane. That patient is more happy than a lot of other people where you have not 20/20 results. And I distinctly remembered his words, Ramu. Thanks for that. And he's a wonderful human being. He can manage people very well. Being the All India Ophthalmic Society president, you will learn to manage the world, how it is. So many things in life.
Thank you. I've been too kind.
So yes, breaking news, the sandwich technique, good idea. Hardik, બીજું કઈ કેવું છે તારે?
ના સર.
Dad ની પાસથી કઈ golden words from dad?
He's already watching the session.
Okay. Great. So time is up, friends, and thanks so very much, Dr. Reshma, Hardik, Pooja, and Rohan for valuing your absolute good time and good conversation that we had. Great amount of learning, and this should go a long way for us to face the future. Thanks very much, everybody. And